But 15 days to go. 15 until the midterm elections. And with much at stake, the new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll suggests it is difficult to tell what the outcome will be. Think about that. According to the poll, 50% of likely voters are inclined to support candidates from the Democratic Party, while 41% are for the Republicans. At the same time, President Trump's approval rating among this group of voters is at 45%, some of the best marks of his presidency. This as enthusiasm about the election is up among core groups that support Democrats. 72% of the party's voters have high interest in the election, up 25 points from 2014, while at 71%, Hispanic voters have seen a 33-point increase in interest from the last midterm elections. High interest is at 68% among black voters, 67% among women, 51% among young voters. That's a 22-point bump from 2014. And, Joe, you just have to wonder, though, is that good for Trump, that interest growing, or is it good for the Democrats?
Well, John Hyland, you look at a lot of numbers. First of all, the key numbers that we always look at, three of them about this time. One of them has to do with the president's approval rating. It's higher than it's ever been, or as high as it's ever been. You look at the ballot test and the NBC poll, it has tightened and gotten closer, 8-9 points. You look at intensity. Intensity is up among Democrats, but after Kavanaugh, it's up among Republicans as well. This race does not look to be the foregone conclusion it once was, and Democrats appear to be even losing ground in the Senate. Where do you put it 15 days out?
Yeah, there's no doubt about all of that. I think the notion that I think the conventional wisdom is basically still that Democrats are more likely than not, by a reasonable amount, more likely to take control of the House. The question is, like, how big by how much? And the situation for Democrats in the Senate, which, again, maybe a month ago, people were starting to think there was some chance that Democrats might be able to thread the needle and take control of the Senate. That is more or less gone from most people's scenarios now. It is the case that if history is a guide, if you look at where Donald Trump's approval rating is right now, and you compare it to where Barack Obama's approval rating was in 2010, that would foretell a large swing in the House. But I think Obama lost, the Democrats lost, 69, 66, somewhere in the mid to high 60s of seats in 2010. And if you look back at Bill Clinton, even back in 1994, a similar kind of thing happened. Now, does history hold? Does history govern in the era of Donald Trump? I don't know. But there's no question that a combination of the post-Kavanaugh the new post-Kavanaugh landscape and the natural tightening that we were going to see in any circumstance in October, those things have Democrats worried. And those things, I think, rightfully have Democrats worried that this is certainly not going to be a slam dunk for them, as people thought for most of this year.
It certainly doesn't look like the tsunami, Steve Kornacki, that everybody was talking about. I mean, you go in the House races. I know a lot of people that have studied all the House races. I know you certainly have. They still see an outside path to Republicans actually retaining control of the United States House. Maybe they lose 18, maybe they lose 19 seats. That would have been unthinkable even 2-3 months ago. Where do you see it right now?
Yeah, I think what John said is correct. Look, the Democrats are still more likely than not to take the House. The Senate looks like it's changed pretty dramatically in the Republicans' favor in the last few weeks. I think that the two big variables where we've seen movement that sort of accounts for this, number one, you put the president's job approval number up there. Just overall, poll after poll, when you average it together, he's at sort of the high point here, the high water mark, almost for his entire presidency, absent the first, week or so when he had the closest thing to a honeymoon he was ever going to have as president. But he's sitting there in the average of all polls at about 44% approval. Republicans said, just given the nature of the map, they thought if they could get him into the mid-40s, they might have a fighting chance of keeping the House. But the other big variable that's changed in the last few weeks is the question of enthusiasm. And this isn't to say that anything has changed on the Democratic side with enthusiasm, because Democratic enthusiasm has been through the roof from the minute Donald Trump was elected 2 years ago. It is still through the roof. The thing that's changed is the Republican enthusiasm has ticked ticked up. Not quite equal with the Democratic number, but getting closer to it. And when you think back to those past midterm landslides John was talking about, 2006, 2010, even 2014, when the Republicans had a sneaky midterm landslide that kind of came on late, you ended up seeing double-digit enthusiasm gaps between the parties in those years. And right now what we're seeing is seemed to be the potential for that over the summer when Democrats were talking about making inroads beyond just the suburbs, making inroads well into Trump country, 40, 50 seat gains, that kind of thing. It seems that the Republicans have gotten close to parity on enthusiasm. Not enough where I think they're at all favored to keep the House or anything, but enough where the conversation's changed.
Kristen, let me ask you a question off of this. We talk every day about the horse races, the House, the Senate. We talk every day about voter enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm, Democrats versus Republicans. In your polling, in your experience, there's another issue out there. I'm wondering if it registers as deeply as the day-to-day stuff does. We have a deeply and intentionally dishonest president of the United States who takes to the country multiple times a week with the single intent of dividing the country with deep, deep lies that twist and turn facts into myth. Does that register?
In poll after poll, when you ask people what attributes they assign to the president, trustworthiness is not one that he does well on, even among Republicans. So voters already sort of know that, and I feel like it's baked into his numbers. I think it's just sort of an accepted thing that you get with Trump, but you also get good economic growth, and for some voters, that's the bargain they've chosen to strike. And so when you look at the top issues in that NBC Wall Street Journal poll, the top issue is the economy. 38% of voters said that's their top issue, and Republicans in this poll are winning on that issue by the largest margin, I think it said, in the history of the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. So it's a trade-off that voters are making in their mind where they're like, yeah, he's kind of a jerk, but he's our jerk, and maybe the economy's going well. I think that's the way a lot of voters are thinking about this. There's one other issue that stuck out to me in this poll that I think is why we have such a sense of this election being up in the air, and that's the question of change. Now, normally in these midterm elections, when you've got a new president in power, the party out of power is challenging, it's really, we need change, we need something different. And sure enough, when I go into focus groups and ask people what are they thinking, they say, I feel like we can't keep going on like this. But in this NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Republicans win among those on the question of who's going to bring about change to Washington, which is a very strange dynamic for a midterm election like this.
Joe, I would submit that the acceptance of a deeply, deeply, deeply dishonest president, the acceptance of that among people is the single most important issue of our day.
Well, it is, and you have to ask, what's the alternative to Donald Trump? I think one of the most fascinating and disturbing polls that we saw week in and week out during 2016 was honest and trustworthy numbers. Donald Trump was in the mid-30s. At times, Hillary Clinton was lower than that. But when people went to the voting booth, actually, Hillary Clinton had lower honest and trustworthy numbers than Donald Trump. Right now, there is no national Democrat to balance that against. Right now, those national Democrats, if you ask people, they'd say it is Nancy Pelosi, it is Elizabeth Warren, it is Dianne Feinstein, it is perhaps Chuck Schumer. But, you know, Mika, it is an absolute mess. And Dianne Feinstein, of course, her name got thrown out there because of the Kavanaugh hearings. And the numbers I looked at, you look at voter intensity. I always say in these midterms, it's not the generic ballot test that matters. It's voter intensity. Democrats had double-digit leads, Mika, before the Kavanaugh hearings. They disappeared in a big way after the Kavanaugh
That's news
hearings.
that no Democrat wants to hear, that perhaps the Kavanaugh hearings were misplayed. Look, last week I expressed concern that Democrats were blowing the midterm elections despite the fact that it should not be close. This did not get a good reaction all day on Friday. After looking at the latest polling, though, and reporting out there, that concern has become a grim acceptance that my party is potentially falling short again. If America's reaction to nearly 2 years of Donald Trump as president is to reward him with continued Republican control of the Senate and the House, That would be disastrous on so many levels to mention. But that possibility is rising by the day. Look at the numbers, unless Americans do something about it over the next 2 weeks. The new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows Republicans' interest in the elections is up, thanks in part to the Kavanaugh hearings. And President Trump's approval ratings are in the mid-40s. Think about that. Nearly half of the people in this country approve of the job this man is doing, even after Charlottesville, porn stars, his humiliation in Helsinki, bowing to Kim Jong-un, ripping babies from their mothers, calling Hispanics breeders, destroying America's most critical alliances, and bankrupting our country. And we could go on. With just over 2 weeks to go, are Democrats still lulling themselves into believing that they will win simply because Trump is abhorrent and history is on their side? That was not enough in 2016.
No, it wasn't.
And it won't be enough now. This is hard to say. People don't want to hear it, but the party badly misplayed the Kavanaugh hearings. Like Hillary, they lack a message and their leaders lack heart. And unless trends change over the next 15 days, Democrats are going to wake up to the same kind of political reckoning they did 2 years ago. And at least I believe that will prove a disaster for the Democratic Party, the tradition of divided government, and the dream of American democracy. That's where it's all on the line right now.
Well, and so much, John Meacham, is on the line over the next couple of weeks, and Mika spelled it out. And there are a lot of people, a lot of not just Democrats, there are a lot of Republicans and independents that are going, wait a second, after Charlottesville, after a policy that intentionally puts children in cages, rips babies from their mother's arms intentionally, after porn stars, after the humiliation at Helsinki, after we could go down the list. Donald Trump saying he was in love with Kim Jong-un, embarrassing himself there, after destroying our alliances, and after putting America on the path to bankruptcy, highest national debt ever. Massive deficit. 45% of Americans still say, yeah, I approve of his job as president. That is very vexing for the 55% of us who don't approve of the way he's handling himself in the White House. How do we put that into perspective, John?
I think 55-45 is a pretty good way of thinking about it. Trump is not a wholly new force in American politics. But he is the most vivid manifestation of many of our worst characteristics. And we have to be honest about that. Harry Truman once said that we get the government we deserve. Politicians are far more often mirrors of who we are than they are molders. We like the idea that people, like in Shakespeare's history plays, Henry V shapes who we are. Far more often, they reflect who we are. And, the Constitution was written for moments like this. It assumed that we were sinful and driven by ambition and appetite and greed. It's why they made it so hard for us to get anything done. They basically bet that we would get things wrong more often than we get them right, and we have proven them correct with astonishing regularity. This is an extreme moment, but it's not a wholly separate moment. And I think that until we genuinely grapple with the fact that Donald Trump hasn't hijacked the country, he's just magnified our darker elements, we probably can't really come to the kind of resolution we need to come to.
Now, and Mika, he has magnified that. And again, what we bumped in with at the top of this block is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Here you have something that every president would go out and say, you know what, Democrats and Republicans still can work together. We still can get things done. Take, for instance, our work together on both sides of the aisle to try to face down the scourge of opioids and that epidemic that's killing so many people, ruining. I mean, most presidents would take great heart in that because that's making Washington work. Donald Trump takes that, he lies and tears it to shreds, tries to make it partisan. It's that's his game.
Well,
We'll see if he's rewarded.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, no one said it better than Tim Russert. Florida, Florida, Florida. There is new polling from that key battleground. Plus, we're taking Morning Joe on the road this week.
Where?
To Florida.
Yes.
And we've got details on how you can be a part of the show. Also, the very latest on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Key senators now say the U.S. should have nothing to do with the kingdom's young leader. Big developments on that ahead.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.